And welcome to all of you who are here. It is good to have you with us for this press briefing. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to those of you who are following us online. We have just finished the thematic plenary on One Spirit, and we have two speakers from that plenary. Marian Turski, who offered us a very moving testimony at the beginning of the plenary, and Reverend Dr. Brooke Ayele, who was our keynote speaker. Thank you both for your presentations earlier. I think we will do this as we've done before. We will begin with, I have a question for each of you, and then I think we would open it up to questions. We also have Reverend Dr. Sivan Kitt, who is the LWS Director for Theology, Mission and Justice. He has been organizing the thematic plenaries, and he is here also, and it's good to have you with us, Sivan. Thank you. Maybe if I can begin with you, Mr. Turski. Louder. Thank you. Mr. Turski, we walked in silence yesterday, the whole assembly, through Auschwitz and Birkenau. And we were taking in what happened there with our eyes and with our ears, as our guide spoke and described. And it was very moving. And then at the end, we had a moment of prayer together. And we spoke from the silence, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. And today we are continuing, and we want to speak in a way that is meaningful about this. And I found what you said about hate speech as the ground from which atrocities emerge. I found that very strong. And I wanted to ask you what advice you have for us as people, but also for us as churches on that.
Well, let's refer to your first sentence, your first statement. I was invited to be in Auschwitz when the Pope Francis was there. And afterwards, some newsmen, some political people were blaming him that he didn't say any word. I defended him, because there are some situations when silence is much more meaningful than any word. Because sometimes I'm asked, everybody knows the famous expression of Adorno, that after Auschwitz you cannot write a poem. No, I don't agree with Adorno, because if anything can inspire your imagination, it's maybe music, maybe poetry, because you cannot exactly tell what is suffering. And silence inspires you. Silence gives you a possibility to enrich, to develop, to enlarge your imagination. Now, what advice? I was very moved when Dr. Burke, yeah? When you mentioned, when he emphasized that even Christians in Ethiopia, that how they cannot follow their faith because they are killing each other because of ethnic prejudices, because they are biased. Listen, I analyzed as a historian very carefully what happened in Rwanda. This is unbelievable. How you can see, you can watch, you can notice that in a very short time, when the propaganda is concentrated in one hand and one-sided, it can change the psyche. Of course, people who are as pastors as you are have also influence on politicians. First of all, you mentioned today unity without variety, diversity. If you have diversity of information, this is the one of the, I would say, conditions. If you have a propaganda, one-sided, this is so dangerous, at most dangerous. So this is maybe an advice, but what else? You know better.
Thank you so much. Reverend Dr. Brook, I would actually like to, because I think you were in many ways speaking to very similar themes from different perspectives. I would actually like to pose the same question to you. You walked with us yesterday, and thinking of the context that you were also referring to, how can we speak out against this? What advice do you have?
Thank you very much. The experience yesterday we had was extremely abhorring and disturbing, and it makes us angry. But that's not the end. It makes us angry. But we have, that helps us to understand the need for the good news, of peace, the good news of reconciliation, the good news of forgiveness is indispensable. I believe we have that power at hand, the power of forgiveness. When we talk about the love of Jesus Christ, that is, it takes Jesus to die because of this kind of extremely horrible situations that we human beings do to one another. So as much as we are angry, as much as we are terrified, we should not take grace we should not take for granted grace. We should not take for granted the good news of the gospel. That is what makes our ministry should be very serious. We have to take that seriously, not lightly, that we should act according to the Bible. That's what I can say. But in the meantime, when we talk about reconciliation, love, and forgiveness, we have to do that. Yes, the issue of, I mean, when we saw our experience yesterday could create hatred, another hatred, that shouldn't happen. That is where the New Testament reverses things. We should forgive. That is why we need forgiveness. It should end somewhere. Otherwise, it should be a vicious circle that one does the same after the other. When the victim becomes a villain, then the same happens because we have carried the same sinful nature. So that is why, even though we are angry, even though we are disturbed, but it tells us how serious forgiveness of sins, reconciliation, and love is needed.
Thank you. I'd like to open it up to some questions from the journalist Benjamin. Maybe you go first.
Thank you very much, Benjamin Lasive, freelance journalist from Germany. Mr. Turski, I'd like to ask you regarding a phenomenon we can see in Europe in these days. How are your thoughts about the upcoming of right-wing nationalistic parties in nearly all European countries, especially in Germany with the AfD? What is somebody who experienced a life like you thinking about it?
Well, I would try to answer as a historian. If you, of course, it would be a European point of view. If you evaluate what happened in Europe after 45, after the 50s, more or less, you could single out that a decade was around, and the spirit, the tendency, the orientation, the European tendency was either liberal leftist, social democrat, in the beginning it will go also communist in France, in Italy, then a decade conservative, the Tories, the Christian Democrats, and then once more social democrats and liberals. So this was like a balance, like in physics, a balance. But sometimes, and this is what I try to say today in my short speech, sometimes you have a phenomenon like in time of the Crusades, like in the time of pandemics in the 13th century, like in the 16th century when there were the religious war, the Reformation, the religious war, Napoleon Wars, First War, when you have some great shake of entire societies, an upheaval, a change of everything. And this is what I try to depict in the symbolism of the apocalyptic horses. Yes, this is maybe a time of a curve. And in such situations, people are afraid. People on the streets, they don't know what to do. They are not secure. People would like to have security, to see some hope for the next day. And this is why you have also a chance for populist leaders like AfD, like in my country, like in Hungary, like in France, like in very many places of Europe. I'm very old, so I'm sure that it will change. I'm not sure that I will be a witness of the changes, better changes. But in history, it happened so. It was overcome in history. After crusades, after the pandemics, after the religious war, it was also peace. So I hope if there won't be a cataclysm, a total catastrophe, maybe humanity will survive. But I am not sure that I will be a witness of it.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Tuski, I'm Stefan Kosch from the German magazine Zeitzeichen. You said that in your eyes, religion is one source of anti-Semitism. Can you explain this a little bit more and tell us what do you expect from the religious leader you spoke to clean religion from anti-Semitism? Is it possible, maybe you can tell us about, to clean this Christianity from anti-Semitism?
If I pointed out the ground, the historical ground of origins of anti-Semitism, everybody knows how it happened. It happened because it started even just from the beginning. And I am to appreciate and to be absolutely to admire the courage, for instance, of a Polish Archbishop, Cardinal Rich, who wrote recently. He is a historian, so he took only the period between Constantine and Luther, the Middle Ages, Antiquity and Middle Ages, the attitude of the Church and of the Vatican, of the popes, toward Judaism. Very courageous, very objective. And I am not sure that he's supported by very many of his other bishops. But why is it so important? Because, listen, you have so many people who from the beginning are inspired in this spirit of being suspicious to somebody who is a stranger, who is different in his way of life, in his, sometimes in his speech, in his language. And this is why this is to be overdone, overwhelmed. This is a long process, I know. It doesn't take 1 year, 2 years. Maybe it will take some generations. But if you don't do it step by step, you won't achieve it. Never. This is my answer.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you very much. Briefly, to your question, what religious leaders can do. For me, the New Testament is against anti-Semitism. The Bible is against anti-Semitism because the New Testament is very clear that it is about reconciliation of the Jews and the Gentiles. That is bringing all together. So the message is for all. Unless we interpret it in a wrong way. That is how I understand. But connected to the previous question, any kind of nationalism, narrow nationalism, presupposes hatred, presupposes a narrative against someone else. It's not something only in Europe. It's elsewhere as well. In Africa, elsewhere, when people are narrow nationalists, then they are against the whole concept of humanity. So it ends up hatred, and hatred is against human welfare and justice. So that is something we should be against and voice.
From an LWF perspective, I think it's very clear that in 1984 is a very important moment in Hungary. Because in 1984, the global Lutheran communion rejected categorically anti-Semitism, especially rejecting and distancing ourselves with Luther's anti-Judaistic writings. Now, our Jewish partners actually have commented us. In fact, they say that this is very remarkable that we challenge our own founders' writings. And also in that assembly, the LWF also affirmed the integrity of the Jewish faith, and there was dialogues that continued after that. There was a later publication in 2003 entitled A Shift in Jewish-Lutheran Relations, where this kind of reflection continues as a self-critical reflection, but also taking into account the various complexities of historical, social, political, economic circumstances, and of course, without ignoring the religious impulses that may be used or abused for purposes of hatred and often for political gain. Now, moving on to today, one of the reasons that we published this document, a study document for renewing Jewish-Christian relations, is that this is not only an European conversation, but this is a global conversation as well. And the experiences of Auschwitz yesterday, for many of those who are not from Europe, was an opportunity for us to resonate with other aspects of challenges that we have in our own context. But back to your question, this particular resource also highlights the wounds in history and the contemporary challenges around this particular topic. So this is not just about statements, but also study and resources that the grassroots need to address, not only the ground, but also whatever seeds that may be sown into that ground or watering it that may generate that kind of hate rather than hospitality towards the neighbor.
Make one comment more. With your permission, please pay attention to something significant. There are states and countries in the world where Christians are in a minority, and they are the object of hate. You see, it could be reversed also.
Thank you. I like how this is turning into a panel discussion. That is very good. I want to pick up on something which you mentioned and referred to, and you were talking about the many sites of atrocities in the world, and actually it brought me to your own country, because you've been dealing with conflict there, and you're also dealing with very serious effects of climate change, and somehow there is a sense that these are actually all connected to some extent. But I would like to hear from you a bit on what you see as the church's role, specifically in Ethiopia, vis-a-vis these conflicts and vis-a-vis mitigating the effects.
I mentioned in my presentation, there is a systemic oppression globally that brings lots of destruction as the outcome of climate change. And we are the ones who are more paying the outcome of the climate change in many ways. It's very evident today in Africa. Of course, elsewhere, globally, we are facing climate change and its destructive effect. So that is something we stand together against it. Mekane Yesus Church has been one of the leading agents in fighting against climate change in Ethiopian context locally in the last 40, 60 years, still active now. And currently the government also involved in a massive scale, planting 5 to 10 billion seedlings every year. And only in the last 4 years, we were able to plant over 20 billion seedlings. And this will continue for the next 5 years, and we want to see major change in Ethiopia, and the church is part of that project. But as to the atrocities, the killings, ethnic problem, in my country, I made it very clear that that is where we are still struggling and failed, in a sense, that to see two Mekane Yesus members killing one another, taking up rifle, because one belongs to this ethnic group and the other belongs to that ethnic group. And it goes as far as two neighboring ethnic groups, because of the hatred. They came and burned out all the village, including the church building, which they belong to, because they think that church belongs to that ethnicity, not Mekane Yesus, not the Church of Christ. So nationalism, narrow nationalism, blinds you. It really hinders you to see even what you think is right. You cannot see. Once you are blinded, you are blinded. So that is now we are trying to address in so many different ways, but it needs higher level, massive kind of training and workshops and so on, people are extremely indoctrinated with hatred. And at the moment, it seems that that propaganda of ethnicism, ethnocentrism that was preached in the last 30, 35 years seems stronger than the Bible. So we are working on how to reverse. The New Testament is about reversal. So in our theological education, in our Sunday preaching, we are trying to help our pastors, thousands of pastors, to negate that, to reverse that on the pulpit and help the members to come back and have a better sight. That is where we think about healing from hatred. I mean, hatred is the worst thing that kills us.
Dr. Brack inspired me to the following idea. My dear friends, everybody of us has different duties, everybody, different loyalties. Loyalty to his family, loyalty to his children, loyalty to his town, to his local community, loyalty to his nation, loyalty to his state, to his religion, and so on, so on, so on. When it fits, wonderful, then you have no problem. Sometimes it is in conflict. Conflict between your imagined loyalty to your religion and to some other people. Loyalty to your country and to other people from other countries. And this is the main duty of the spiritual leaders, to make the people understanding, to diminish those conflicts. Because if you have a very sharp conflict, you have what happened in Rwanda. And this is also a matter of observing way of system of your education. I'm sorry, in my country, in Poland, the current Minister of Education, after him, nation is most important, religion is most important. If one of the leaders of this country speaks that he would like to re-Christianize Europe. So this is, for him, a loyalty above all. In this case, everything else is less important. So here you see what is the great responsibility of the spiritual leaders.
Thank you. We're going to have to wrap up fairly soon. I have a final question which I would actually like to pose to all of you. You mentioned in your testimony this morning, do not fear the stranger, and how fear of the stranger can have ripple effects. Let's put it like that. And we have we've used a different phrasing of this, which is welcome the stranger. But I would actually like to sort of ask, and Sivin, I think I'll include you in this too, and maybe you can begin. How can we as religious leaders work to nurture more welcoming communities? Sivin, I'll begin with you.
The LWF, together with Islamic Relief Worldwide and also HIAS, the largest Jewish humanitarian organization, was part of a very important pledge called Welcoming the Stranger, Shaping the Future, Living as Neighbors. And this was our joint commitment to work together to advocate for the inclusion of strangers, in this sense refugees, in our midst. And this is a very practical way in which we see the other not as a threat, but rather as a human being. And we would even say, to take it further, not only they are strangers, they're actually our neighbors. And I think in the context of what is happening in our neighboring country, the situation of Ukraine, and how Poland has opened up and our churches have been involved in welcoming, it is the encounter of the face of the other. And in fact, that is a very much of inspiration from our Jewish partners and friends. So, of course, practically there are many ways, and of course our preaching, how we conduct ourselves in countering propaganda that is of hate. We need to see the neighbor truly through the eyes of love, and that's not just a nice thing to say, but in real practical terms, and really having conversations and listening. And I really appreciate Mr. Marian Turski for you saying that things can get turned around, and there are many Christians who are minorities, and they are treated as strangers. And in that conversation, we are resonating together, and how important that we need to transcend these boundaries and ethnic lines and so on. So very much appreciate your comment to that. I think that is a modeling of the way forward.
Thank you. Let me begin this way. I think no one has chosen to be themselves in the way they are now. I never chose, I didn't intend to be Ethiopian and born there. So I didn't intend to be black. So that is how God created us. That means anybody can be the other person. So I think the fear of the stranger, the fear of other, can easily be mitigated if it is easy. If we think and if we are able to put our shoes on the place of the other. What if, we need to ask the question, what if I am that stranger? Would I want to be treated that way? That is one way we need to think. Just that is the golden rule, both in the Bible and in the Quran and in other religious scriptures. The best way is to think that way, that what if I am the other person? What if I am the stranger? Is that the way? The other thing is, even those who think we are very bad people, cruel people, they are human beings, and in their own circle, they are humans. They are humble. They are loving. They are caring. If we avoid the fear and we bring them closer to us, then even those negative people whom we fear can be our friends, can be our neighbors, as the Bible says. So it's all about the thinking we have, that we think narrowly and we fail to understand the real truth, that we all are one and the same. We are humanity, and we have more of oneness than we are different.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turski. I will give you the final word.
My dear, whenever you pay attention to history, you see that whenever you got migrations of nations, sometimes they were very intensive in the fall of the Roman Empire, then afterwards, very many phases. Those who were endangered, that they were be deprived of their good place, of their successes. They were afraid. And this is what we have to understand. Oh yes, we have to understand that sometimes very many people, I will give you, even you mentioned, and you are right, the hospitality of my nation, of the Polish nation, towards the Ukraine. But listen, it is not true when you speak about this part of the Ukrainian emigres who were Roma and Sinti. In this case, the attitude is not as so hospitable. It is not as hospitable when you have to do, when you have to deal with people from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from other people from Ethiopia, who pay being cheated really by very many people. They pay $1,000 to get to Minsk in order to be smuggled to the Polish border. And here, the fears of Poles, but on the other hand, you cannot solve it totally. But in any case, it is our obligation, it is a must to be humane, to a humane one individual fate. What more?
Thank you so much. And again, thanks to all of you for being here and for following us. We will have a business plenary this afternoon where we will have elections, and the media who are here are welcome to follow in person, and those of you who are online can follow the live stream. There will be no press briefing tomorrow. Tomorrow the Assembly will visit local congregations and worship there with the people, and that's going to be an important moment for us to get a better sense of where we are. And then we will return on Monday morning again.
Can I say one? I wanted to assure you I am not going to run for president.
Well, you speak as an inspiring leader, so I think you might get votes. Thank you all for being here also, Reverend Dr. Sivan Kitt, Reverend Dr. Brooke Ayali, and Mr. Marian Tuski, and our interpreter. And I don't know your name, and I'm sorry about that. Our interpreter, Eva Soika, who was here to help us. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.